Silence. Long enough to make your heart sink. The little filly gave a soft, shaky whinny that
Out on the
sounded
far
less
edge
like
of
a
the
horse and
frontier,
more like
where
a
the
child
wind
calling out
speaks
for
louder
someone
than
who
most
wasn't
men,
coming.
a story
50
unfolded
cents?
that folks
The
around Bitter
auctioneer
Creek
tried,
still
half
whisper
joking.
about like it
Anyone?
happened yesterday.
50
It
cents?
begins with a
The
rancher who
chuckles
had
rolled
nothing
across the
left to
barn like
lose.
loose tumbleweed.
A man worn
Ain't worth the
down
rope
by
she's
drought,
tied with.
debt, and
Someone
disappointment,
muttered.
carrying the last
50 cents
flicker
and
of
I'll
hope
turn
the
her
way
into
a
dog
dying
food.
campfire holds
Another
its
whispered,
final ember.
not even
And
trying
yet,
to hide his
on a
grin.
morning that seemed
Earl
as
wasn't
empty
the
as
kind
his
of man
pockets,
to make
fate
dramatic
nudged him
gestures.
toward a shabby county
But something
auction.
inside him cracked
The
open
kind
in
of
that
place
moment.
where dreams
That
usually
tiny
go to
filly
die,
lifted her head
not
just
get
enough
reborn.
for their
That
eyes to
was
meet.
where he saw her.
Wide,
A
searching
trembling
eyes,
filly
full
no
of
bigger than a
confusion and something
shepherd
that
dog,
strangely
mud-caked,
resembled
half-starved, and if
Earl
we're
felt
honest,
an
worth less
unexpected
than the
twist in
rope
his
tied
chest.
around her neck.
The kind you
50
feel when
cents.
something
That's
broken
all
looks
it
at you
took
like
for the
maybe
crowd
you're
to
the one
laugh,
person
for
who
the
won't walk
auctioneer to
away.
shrug, and
His
for a
hand
broke
rose
rancher
before
to
he
raise
fully
his
understood
hand
what he was
anyway.
doing.
What he didn't
Sold.
know was that this
To the
tiny,
man in the hat.
forgotten
The
creature would
auctioneer
one day
barked,
carry him
relieved to
into a
move on.
future he never
A
imagined.
ripple of amusement passed
A
through the
future
crowd as
paved
Earl
with
walked
redemption,
forward.
legacy,
50
and a
cents,
fortune
someone
measured
joked.
far beyond money.
Cheapest mistake
And
he's
here
ever
on
made.
WesTtalesas A Down,
Mistake or
this
not,
is only
Earl
the
reached
beginning.
the filly
If
gently.
stories of grit,
She
heart,
flinched at his
and
touch,
Wild West
but didn't
miracles
pull away.
resonate with you,
He
saddle
loosened the
up with
rope
us
from her
here
neck,
on
whispering
WesTtalesas A
quietly,
Down. Tap
"Easy,
like
girl.
if you believe small
I ain't here
beginnings
to hurt
can
you."
spark big
There
destinies.
was no ceremony,
Subscribe
no
to keep
dramatic
riding
music,
with our
no
frontier
crowd
family,
cheering him on.
and share this
Just a
tale with
broke
someone
rancher
who
with a
needs a
soft spot he
reminder that
didn't
hope
know he
often
still
shows
had,
up in
and a
unexpected
fragile filly
shapes.
barely
The
clinging
wind
to
in
life.
Bitter Creek had a
On
way
the
of
drive
stripping
home,
a man
Earl
down
kept
to the
glancing
truth.
in the cracked rearview
It
mirror.
didn't matter if you were a
She stood
banker,
wobbly
a
in the
ranch
trailer,
hand, or a
trying and
wanderer
failing to
passing
balance
through
with
town
every
for the
bump in the
first
dirt
and
road.
last time.
Something about her
That wind
vulnerability
carried
pricked at him.
stories, secrets,
What
and
business did he
sometimes
have
a
taking in a
reminder of
filly?
how small you
He could
really
barely
were out
feed
here on
himself.
the frontier.
He hadn't
Earl
slept a full
Dawson
night
knew
in
that
months.
feeling far too well.
The ranch was
Each
falling
morning
apart,
he stepped
and
onto
now
the porch
he had
of
another
what
mouth
was
to
left of his
feed.
ranch. That
"You're a
cold
fool,
wine
Dawson,"
wrapped around him
he
like an
muttered.
old debt collector,
plain fool.
whispering a single
But when
message.
he backed the
You're
trailer up to
running
the
out of
old barn
time,
and
Earl.
opened the door,
Running
the
out
filly
fast.
didn't budge.
He wasn't
She
always
just
the
stared at
broke
him,
rancher
trembling.
the town teased
Earl
him for
knelt,
being.
holding out
Years
his
back,
hand, voice
Earl's
softer than it
land
had been in
stretched
years.
so far you'd lose
"Come on
sight
now,
of the
girl.
herd before you lost
Ain't much
sight
of a home,
daylight.
but it's yours if you want it."
Cowboys respected him.
She hesitated.
Buyers trusted him.
Then, with
and
one
the
shaky
Dawson
step and a
brand,
breathy little
burned into the
snort,
hides
she
of
walked toward
sturdy
him.
cattle, was
That was
something
the moment
folks
the story
recognized
truly
with
began.
pride. But
He named
drought
her
isn't a
Penny.
gentleman.
It
doesn't
seemed
knock
fitting,
before
small,
coming inside.
overlooked, forgotten by the
Barges
world.
in, stays too
But
long,
sometimes the
and
smallest
takes
things
more
have the
than you can
strongest
spare.
hearts.
One bad
first
season
nights were
turned to
brutal.
two, one
Penny
broken
refused
well
food.
turned into three,
She cried through the
and
darkness.
one MIS-timed
Earl
bank
slept beside
loan
her stall,
became a
boots
choke
on,
chain
hat
he
tipped
couldn't
low,
shake.
whispering to her
By
through
the
the
time
long
this
hours.
story begins,
"You're
Earl
safe
owned
now,"
little more than the
he would
dust
murmur.
beneath his boots,
"Ain't
a
nobody
withered
gonna
hat,
hurt you
and
again."
the echo of the man he
Neighbors
used
came
to
by
be.
to look,
He
offering
wasn't heading to
sideways
the
glances
county auction
and
that morning
unsolicited
to buy
advice.
anything. He
Most
couldn't.
of them had
What was he
already
going to
written her
buy
off.
with the change
A few
rattling
whispered
around
that
his
Earl
pocket?
should have let nature take
But
its
ranchers
course.
showed up to
But
auctions
Earl
the
didn't
way
buy
old
Penny because the
churchgoers
world
show up
said
to
she was
Sunday
worth
service, not for
He
what
bought
they
her
might
because
get,
deep down,
but for
the
what it
first time in a
reminded
long
them
while,
of.
he felt
Community,
alive again.
hope, a chance
cost
to
him
feel
50
like they
cents that
still
day.
belonged somewhere.
50 cents
The
that changed
fairgrounds
nothing,
were buzzing the
and then
way
changed
only auction
everything.
days could buzz.
Because by the time that
smell
fragile
of
filly
manure
took her
mixed
first
with
steady
fried
steps
dough.
across the Dawson
Rusty
ranch,
buckets
Earl
sat
didn't just
beside
see a
shiny
rescue.
saddles.
He
Horses
saw a reason
snorted
to
in
keep
their
fighting.
stalls.
And in
Children
Bitter Creek,
tugged on their
reasons
father's
were hard to come
sleeves,
by.
asking for coins to buy
Morning in Bitter
trinkets that would
Creek had
break
always
before
been
sundown.
predictable.
And
The
over
sun
it all
crept slowly
echoed the
over the
rapid-fire chant of the
The wind
auctioneer,
carried its
a
familiar
rhythm that
whistle
could
through the dry
hypnotize you
grass.
into spending money
And Earl
you
Dawson,
didn't have.
whether he'd
Earl
slept or
stood
not,
near the back
would be
fence,
awake before the
coffee in
roosters
hand,
even
watching
remembered their
one
job.
lot after another
But
go
now,
for more than
there
he
was
could
something
dream
new
of.
waiting for him each
Fine
dawn.
geldings,
A tiny
stout
filly
mares,
peering over
even
the
a
stall
pair
door,
of mules that
ears
looked
twitching,
like they'd been
eyes
carved
brighter than the
stubborn
day
oak.
before.
As each
Penny wasn't
animal
strong
sold,
yet.
Earl's thoughts
Not by a
drifted to
long
overdue
shot.
bills, to the
But she was
lonely
trying.
emptiness of his
And
land,
sometimes,
to the sound
trying
of
is the
silence
most
that
powerful
echoed through his
signal that
barn
life
each
still
night.
has a little fight
Then
left
he
in
heard
it.
a shift in
The
the
first
crowd
couple of
tone,
weeks were
the
touch and
kind of
go.
low ripple that
Some
says
nights Earl
something
feared he'd
unusual
wake to
is
terrible
coming.
silence.
Curiosity
Other
made
nights
him
he stayed
glance
up until his
At
lantern
first,
ran out of
he
oil,
thought it was a stray
whispering
dog.
stories of the old ranching
Something
days
small,
just to keep her
muddy,
company.
and
Penny
trembling
would rest her
stepping
head
into the
against his
auction
boot,
ring.
her breath
But
warm
when the
against
handler
the worn
tugged
leather,
lightly on the
as
rope,
if anchoring
the truth
herself to
revealed
the one
itself.
person who
A
hadn't
filly,
given up
barely
on her.
3 months
It
old,
didn't take
no
long for
bigger
word to
than a
spread through Bitter
shepherd dog,
Creek.
legs
News
trembling,
traveled
coat
fast in a
matted
place
and
where boredom
tangled
was
with
the town's
burrs.
biggest employer.
Her ribs pressed
Folks
against
at
her
the general
skin like
store
she had
chuckled while
forgotten what a
scooping
full
flour
belly
into brown
felt like.
bags.
The crowd
You hear
turned
Earl
restless.
bought himself a sickly
Some
foal for
pitied
50
her,
cents?
more laughed.
He's feeding a
And
charity
the
case when he
auctioneer
can't
himself
feed himself.
hesitated. You age.
Poor man's
All
losing
right,
his mind.
folks.
Earl heard
This
every
one's,
comment
a
secondhand,
rescue.
but he didn't
Seems
waste
like,
breath
found
responding.
out by the old
He
railway
wasn't trying to
fence.
impress anyone.
No papers.
He was trying
no
to save
history,
someone.
No sire.
And slowly,
no
Penny
dam.
blossomed.
Who'll start
Her
me at
coat,
$1?
once dull and tangled, began to shine beneath the thin layer of dust she kicked up each day. Her ribs softened as she gained weight. The trembling in her legs faded as her balance returned. She even started to nicker when Earl entered the barn, a sound so gentle it hit him like a sunrise breaking through storm clouds. One day, while repairing a busted gate with hands that had known more blisters than blessings, Earl felt a gentle nudge at his shoulder. He turned and found Penny standing there, staring at him like she'd been waiting for him to notice something important. "What is it, girl?" he chuckled. Instead of answering with sound, Penny darted off in a wide circle around the corral, smooth, confident strides that didn't match her size or her age. Earl straightened, watching as if witnessing the start of something he couldn't quite name. There was grace in her movement. Not clumsy, not desperate, but natural, like she had been born to run. The neighbors didn't see it. They only saw a small filly without papers, pedigree, or purpose. But Earl saw something none of them did. A spark. "Maybe you ain't meant to be average," he whispered to her that evening while brushing her coat. "Maybe you're meant to be something special." Penny leaned into his touch, and the bond, still fragile, tightened. Weeks turned into months, and Penny grew in more ways than one. She followed Earl from the barn to the porch, from the porch to the pasture, and from the pasture straight into the lonely corners of the ranch where he had once stood alone. Eventually, it was time to see what she could do with real space. Earl opened the corral gate one crisp afternoon, and gave her a soft slap on the flank. "Go on then. Show me." Penny hesitated for half a heartbeat, then exploded into motion. Not wild. Not reckless. Just free. Her hooves drummed the earth in perfect rhythm. Dust rose around her like golden smoke. Earl had seen good horses run before, but never like this. There was something hypnotic in the way she stretched out her stride, each step smoother than the last. It was as though running wasn't something she learned, it was something she remembered. Earl felt a strange mixture of disbelief and pride. The kind of pride a father feels when his child takes their first confident step into the world. It wasn't long before curiosity brought a familiar face to Earl's gate. Cal Peterson, a local breeder with more trophies than he had manners, arrived one afternoon in a faded truck. "Heard you got yourself a miracle foal," Cal said, leaning against the fence without waiting for permission. Earl shrugged. "She's just Penny." Cal squinted toward the pasture where Penny grazed lazily, flicking her tail. "That her? Don't look like much." But when she suddenly lifted her head, snorted, and took off in a smooth sprint along the fence line, Cal's posture straightened. "Well, I'll be. She moves like she knows what she's doing." Earl chuckled. "She trained herself. I ain't done much but keep her fed." Cal scratched his chin, surprised. "You ever think about putting her in a race?" Earl burst out laughing. Not mockingly, just genuinely amused. "Cal, I don't even own a saddle that fits her." But the idea lodged itself in Earl's mind like a seed dropped into good soil. A few weeks later, with Cal's encouragement, Earl entered Penny into a small-town charity race. Nothing big. Just a way for local riders to show off their horses. Penny was the smallest entry. The youngest. The least pedigreed. She wore a patched bridle held together by Earl's stubbornness and a prayer. When they brought her to the starting line, laughter rippled through the crowd. "That the runt from the auction? Looks like she'll blow over if the wind hits her wrong." Earl's lost his mind for sure. But Earl wasn't listening. He knelt beside Penny, whispering softly, "Just run, girl. Not for them. For you." The starter raised his hand. A pause. A breath. Then the gun cracked. Penny stumbled. A heartbeat of panic shot through Earl. But then, just like that, she found her rhythm. Her stride leveled out. Her breathing steadied. And she began to fly. She passed one horse. Then another. Then two more. By the final stretch, the crowd had gone silent. They weren't mocking her anymore. Penny surged forward, ears pinned, eyes sharp, hooves hammering the dirt like she meant to chase down the horizon itself. She crossed the finish line first. Earl didn't cheer. He couldn't. His breath was gone, stolen by disbelief. But the crowd erupted, shouting the same line over and over. "Where'd that horse come from?" Earl rested his hand against her neck, voice soft and proud. 50 cents, he whispered. "And a little faith." From that moment on, Bitter Creek changed. Penny wasn't just a filly anymore. She was the filly. A miracle in the making. A story that spread faster than prairie wildfire. People started visiting Earl's ranch, first out of curiosity, then out of wonder. Penny didn't strut, didn't boast, didn't behave like she was becoming something extraordinary. She just kept running. And every time she ran, Earl felt pieces of his old life falling back into place. He didn't know it yet, but Penny's victory was just a spark. What came next would turn that spark into a flame big enough to light the entire West. The filly who refused to quit was only getting started. By the time Penny crossed that finish line in her first small-town race, Bitter Creek was buzzing like a kicked anthill. The barbershop, the diner, the feed store, the church steps on Sunday morning, everywhere Earl Dawson went, he felt eyes on him, though for the first time in years, they weren't full of pity. They were full of curiosity. Wonder. Maybe even a little respect. Still, nobody understood exactly what they had witnessed. Most folks whispered that Penny's win had been pure luck. A fluke. A one-time miracle from a filly who shouldn't have survived her first night on Earth. But the people who saw her run up close knew better. They saw the control in her stride, the precision in her turns, the fire in her eyes. And Earl, he felt something stirring in his chest he hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Real hope. Early the next morning, Earl was in the barn brushing Penny's coat when the familiar growl of an old truck rolled up outside. Sarah Miller, the young reporter from the Bitter Creek Gazette, stepped out with her notebook already open. "Mr. Dawson," she said with a grin, "I think half the county would shoot me if I didn't come right about what happened yesterday." Earl chuckled, shaking his head. "Never figured myself for newsworthy." "Not you," she replied, tapping her pen. "Her." Sarah walked toward the pasture where Penny stood grazing, her coat glowing bronze under the soft light. When Penny lifted her head, ears perked, Sarah froze for a moment. There was something different about the filly, a strange blend of humility and pride, almost human in the way she studied newcomers. "Mind if I watch her run?" Sarah asked. Earl didn't answer with words. He simply opened the pasture gate. Penny didn't bolt out like a wild horse desperate for freedom. She stepped forward with a quiet confidence, head high, almost like she understood she had an audience. Then, with a gentle snort, she broke into a run. Sarah's breath caught. Penny wasn't just fast, she was poetry in motion. Muscles rippled under her growing frame. Her legs struck the ground with perfect rhythm. Every turn, every stride, every breath looked as though she were painting her story across the fields. "Mr. Dawson," Sarah whispered, that isn't normal. She moves like she's been trained for years." Earl shook his head. "No training. Just heart." And that line, simple, honest, true, became the soul of the story Sarah wrote. 2 days later, the headline hit the front page. "The 50-cent filly who runs like the wind." People read it. Then people shared it. Then people started talking about it like Penny was some kind of frontier myth come to life. But myth or not, Penny kept running. And every race she entered, she didn't just win, she dominated. Small-town races turned into regional ones. Regional ones turned into statewide events. Penny was still the smallest horse at every starting line, still the least pedigreed, still the cheapest by a long shot. But the moment the gate opened, she erased every doubt. It wasn't long before trainers, breeders, and racing fans across the West began to whisper her name. Penny. The miracle mare. The underdog with the heart of a champion. With each victory, Earl paid off a little more debt. Repaired a little more of the ranch. Bought better feed. Stronger fencing. Even a second-hand saddle that, surprisingly, fit Penny just right. But he remained the same quiet, grounded man he always had been. He still talked to Penny every morning like she was the only one who understood him. One afternoon, Cal Peterson dropped by again, leaning on Earl's fence with a sigh. "You realize you've got every breeder in 3 counties losing sleep over her?" Earl raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be a compliment?" Cal smirked. "It's supposed to be a warning. Folks don't like losing to a horse with no papers." Earl didn't flinch. "Paper never won a race." Cal laughed. And here I thought I'd seen it all. But Cal wasn't wrong. The more Penny won, the more she disrupted the neat hierarchy of the horse world. People didn't like the idea that a filly bought for $50 could outperform horses worth tens of thousands. Soon, invitations arrived. Handwritten envelopes. Printed flyers. Even a telegram or two. Racing committees from nearby towns wanted Penny in their lineups. Some offered small prize money. Others offered bragging rights. A few offered to pay for her travel. Earl wasn't chasing money. But he knew opportunity when it knocked. With careful thought and Cal's occasional guidance, he entered Penny in the races that mattered, competitions that would test her skill, her endurance, and her heart. The more she raced, the more people flocked to watch. Stands once half-empty became packed. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders waving makeshift signs with Penny's name painted in crooked letters. Vendors sold buttons shaped like horse heads. And one shop even carved little wooden figurines of Penny, small, sturdy, and full of fire. But with fame came offers. A man in a press suit from Amarillo offered Earl $20,000 for Penny after one of her victories. Earl declined without hesitation. Another breeder from Santa Fe tried to sweeten the pot to $55,000. "Mr. Dawson," he said, adjusting his fancy hat, "that filly is worth her weight in gold." "No," Earl replied softly. "She's worth more than that to me." Then came the biggest offer yet. A letter from a Dallas stable owner known for raising champions. His note was brief but staggering. $250,000 cash for Penny. Immediate pickup. No questions asked? Earl sat by the fire that night, staring at the letter. That kind of money could change everything. Clear every debt. Buy back land. Secure a future. Maybe even rebuild the ranch the way it used to be. But through the window, he saw Penny grazing quietly in the moonlight. He remembered her tiny body trembling in that auction ring. The way she leaned against his boot for warmth. The trust she'd placed in him before anyone else in the world believed she was worth saving. Penny wasn't a business asset. She was family. When the sun rose, Earl folded the letter neatly and tossed it into the fire. He didn't watch it burn, but he felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Some things just aren't for sale. And Penny. Penny was one of them. Her story continued to spread. Not because she was the fastest, though she was. Not because she was rare, though she certainly was. But because she reminded people of something they had forgotten. That greatness can come from the most unlikely places. That heart matters more than breeding. That second chances can become legends. By the end of that year, Penny was no longer the underdog. She was the horse everyone came to see. The miracle of Bitter Creek. The 50-cent filly who outran every expectation the world had for her. But the biggest race, the one that would change everything, was still waiting just over the horizon. And Earl, though he didn't know it yet, was about to step into the kind of story folks would tell for generations. Autumn arrived in Bitter Creek with a quiet kind of majesty, painting the hills in amber and gold. Earl Dawson stood by the fence one morning, coffee steaming in his hands, watching Penny stretch her legs across the pasture. She wasn't running fast, not today, just enough to feel the wind against her coat. Age had brought her strength, muscle, and a confidence that made her seem bigger than she truly was. But to Earl, she was still that shaky filly he carried out of a rusted trailer with nothing but faith and a prayer. He thought her story had already reached its peak. She'd outrun pedigrees, humbled breeders, made gamblers lose their hats, and breathed life back into a broken ranch. Earl couldn't imagine asking more of her. But fate hadn't finished shaping their legend. The letter arrived on a crisp morning, slipped under Earl's door by the postal rider who barely stopped long enough to say hello. The envelope was thick, gold embossed, and stamped with the crest of the Western Frontier Derby. Earl stared at it for a long moment before opening it. When he finally broke the seal, his breath caught. By formal invitation, the letter read, Penny Dawson is hereby selected to compete in the Western Frontier Derby, prize purse, $1 million. $1 million. Enough to buy back everything he lost and build something greater. Enough to secure Penny's legacy far beyond the dusty borders of Bitter Creek. Earl folded the letter carefully and walked out to the pasture. Penny lifted her head as he approached, ears pricked, eyes curious. Well now, girl, he murmured, stroking her neck. Looks like the biggest trail of our lives is Cal and Dot. Penny nudged his shoulder, as if telling him she'd already known. Preparing for the Derby wasn't glamorous. Earl didn't have a fancy stable team or expensive trainers. It was just him, the land, and a filly who never stopped believing in herself. They trained without spectacle, early mornings, long trots, careful conditioning, and quiet evenings under the open sky. People in town rallied behind them. The diner hung a massive "Go Penny!" banner across its porch. Schoolkids painted her name in bold strokes on cardboard signs. The general store even ordered special blue ribbons embroidered with Team Bitter Creek. By the time Earl loaded Penny into the old trailer and headed to Denver, the entire valley seemed to be holding its breath. The Western Frontier Derby was unlike anything Earl had ever seen. The track stretched wide under towering stadium lights. Reporters swarmed the grounds like buzzing flies. Photographers snapped pictures of horses worth more than entire ranches. Trainers shouted commands. Fans cheered from long lines at the gates. Earl stepped out of his truck wearing the same worn boots and faded hat he'd owned for years. He felt out of place among the polished professionals and wealthy owners, but Penny didn't seem intimidated. She stepped off the trailer with calm confidence, ears flicking, eyes scanning the track like she belonged there. And maybe she did. Whispers shot through the crowd the moment people recognized her. That's the 50-cent mare. Is that really her? She doesn't look like much. Don't say that. That's how the stories always start. Earl led Penny toward the paddock, brushing a bit of dust from her coat. A reporter shoved a microphone near his face. Mr. Dawson, do you really believe this horse can win against million-dollar champions? Earl smiled softly. She's already won my whole life back. Everything else is just a bonus. Penny nudged him gently, and the cameras clicked. The Derby lineup was fierce. 18 horses, each one taller, stronger, and more expensive than Penny. Their muscles rippled like coiled springs. Their riders wore jackets embroidered with sponsors' names. Their owners padded checkbooks larger than Earl's entire ranch. But not one of them had Penny's story. Not one had her heart. When the call to post crackled over the loudspeakers, Earl walked Penny to the starting gate. She breathed evenly, no nerves, no hesitation. He leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. No matter what happens out there, girl, you already made me a rich man. Penny closed her eyes and rested her forehead gently against his chest. A moment of stillness in a storm of noise. Then the handler led her into lane 7. The gates clanged shut. The crowd roared to life. The announcer's voice thundered. Riders, ready! A pause thick enough to hold a heartbeat. The starting gun cracked. And the world erupted. Penny stumbled for half a second, just enough to make Earl's heart leap into his throat. But then she recovered, stretched her stride, and surged forward with a force that stunned the entire stadium. The other horses bolted ahead in a cluster of power and precision. Penny trailed in last place for the first quarter mile. People leaned forward, whispering that the miracle mare finally met her limit. But Earl didn't blink. He knew her. Knew when she was warming up. Knew when she was saving her strength for the moment she needed it most. And then, Penny shifted. Her ears pinned back. Her stride lengthened. Her hooves struck the dirt with sharpened rhythm. She threaded through the pack like water slipping through cracks in stone. 10th place. 7th. 4th. The crowd rose to its feet. By the final turn, Penny was neck and neck with the favorite, a towering stallion worth $500,000. Earl could barely breathe. "Come on, girl," he whispered into the wind. "Show them." The stands shook with thunderous cheers as the two horses tore down the final stretch. Every stride matched. Every muscle fired. Every heartbeat raced with them. 50 yards left. 40. 30. Then Penny found something inside herself, some forgotten fire, some piece of destiny, and surged ahead by inches. Then a foot. Then a full stride. Earl didn't see the finish line. He saw only Penny. Crossing first. The stadium exploded in sound. Hats flew in the air. Strangers hugged each other. Reporters sprinted toward the track. Earl felt a weight lift from his chest so swiftly he staggered. When Penny was led toward him, sweat-soaked and breathing hard, he wrapped his arms around her neck, burying his face in her coat. "You did it, girl," he whispered through tears. "You did it for both of us." The $1 million prize made Earl Dawson a wealthy man overnight. But he didn't buy a mansion. He didn't buy new trucks or fancy clothes. Instead, he bought back his land acre by acre. Then he built something he dreamed of for years, a sanctuary for abandoned, injured, and forgotten horses. He named it Penny's Promise. People came from across the West to see the miracle mare who had beaten the odds at every turn. Penny grew older gracefully, her muzzle dusted with gray, her strides slower but still steady. Earl rode her every evening up the ridge where the sun dipped low over Bitter Creek. And when Penny passed peacefully beneath the old oak tree she'd once sprinted beneath, the whole town came to say goodbye. They buried her on the ridge overlooking the ranch she had saved. The wooden sign read, "Penny, the 50-cent miracle who made 1,000,000 dreams come true." Years later, when Earl himself had grown old, a reporter asked him what he learned from her. He smiled toward the ridge and said quietly, "People think this story's about money. It ain't. It's about worth. Sometimes the smallest life can change yours. Sometimes all it takes is 50 cents, and a little faith." And with that, the legend of Earl Dawson and Penny entered the eternal folklore of the West. A story fit for every firelight. A story that made Bitter Creek proud. A story we tell here on WesTtalesas A Down, where hope still rides across the frontier.